All right, I want to welcome everybody to this week's Matrexit Discussion Group call for tactical sovereignty. And this evening, we're just going to do what originally was intended. We're here first week of July 2022. It's been an interesting beginning of this month. But yeah, we're just going to do what was originally intended. And we were just going to have, these weekly calls for group members to get together and chit chat, talk, throw ideas about different things back and forth. And so, yeah, that's the plan this evening. So welcome to everybody that's here. I see a couple more people starting to jump on the board, but I was just kind of chatting with Haya on some different things that we've looked at that have occurred this week. Part of what I use for a background. I thought it would be time appropriate. Put the Georgia Guidestones in the background. The ones that used to be standing anyway.
Yeah.
But evidently they, yeah, there's mixed opinions within even like the truth community regarding this, because we've seen the past several years, and I mean I've even seen it here down in Southwest Florida with them like wanting to tear down statues of like Robert E. Lee and things like that. And there's a sentiment out there that, hold on, wait a minute, here a year ago everybody was saying no, you shouldn't tear down the stuff, even if it's good or bad. It needs to be left up just at least as a memorial to what has happened in our past, to remind us, of what we need to look out for as far as moving into the future. Is you lose your past and yet you kind of lose your stronghold on things that have happened and what they've led to. And so some of those things are good for a reminder. But when I look, for instance, at this situation, I don't see this as being something that should be reminding us of an event that happened in the past or a notable figure, whether they were good or bad. This is something that was just somewhat anonymously put up with some ideas on it as far as a plan to move forward. Say, for instance, in a situation where there was, a collapse of society as you know it, and maybe people would come along later and find this, who knows what the real intentions were. But either way, they were kind of showing their hand as what they would like to see happen with the world, which of course started out with, maintaining a population under 500 million people. So, and that of course doesn't really sound very good, because that would pretty much be eliminating a huge amount of the current population. Anyway, what are your thoughts on that, Aya? If you're still there. I think sometimes it's
yes,
good.
I'm here. Can you hear?
Yeah, I got you.
Can you hear me? Okay, so I know in some of the ancient biblical stories, they talk about tearing down the idols and idolatry, and even it says about the Creator taking down the pillars and such, the high places, and taking them down.
Yeah, there's mention of that scripturally as far as, getting rid of any of the negative influences, especially things that would fall into the category of idols. I think your connection kind of dropped off a little bit there. He went silent on us. I know we've got...
You got me now? I'll stay in one place.
All right, you're good right there where you're at now. Yep.
I'm not moving. Yeah, taking down the altars, the false altars that try to exalt themselves up against the knowledge of God. And I'm glad that they're down. I can't go in
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, I think that it's a good thing that it's going to be eliminated. Unfortunately, though, the sentiment behind it, I believe, still exists in a core of people that are running things that shouldn't be running things. But I think that's kind of what happens when people, I don't want to say get lazy, but they sit back and they'd rather have other powers run their affairs for them. But they need to realize that when you do that, that those powers that you allow to exist and run things for you are going to do things in a way that benefits themselves. They're not necessarily going to be looking out for the good of everybody.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the next one is going to be Mount Herman and the UN building or something. Who knows?
Yeah, I don't think the UN's going to let
I don't
anything
know if
happen
that's.
to their base there.
They might try to go under the mountain or something.
I wouldn't be surprised if they don't already have some things possibly under that mountain. And it's interesting that mountain, the northern edge of it, sits on 33-degree parallel and longitude, which is kind of interesting.
Is that right?
Yep.
Wow, that's why.
And scripturally, that was where the angels that were cast out of heaven supposedly landed on.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things about Mount Hermon,
1/3 of the angels fell.
yeah, the claim is 1/3 of the angels, but and then I've also heard the number of 200, which would mean that the total sum of the angels would be 600, which means there are only 400 left. And I don't know, I have a hard time, kind of wondering where they come up with these numbers at, because sometimes it really doesn't make sense.
Is this Roger talking?
Yep, it is. One of the things that's interesting with Mount Hermon also, and it's a notable scripture that gets, talked about and repeated on a lot, regarding Peter and Jesus, was that, Jesus had said, upon this rock, I will build my church. And they're trying to draw a correlation between the name Peter, which means, a stone or pebble, and that Jesus was referencing Peter. And I believe even, the Catholic Church has used that partially as their basis for having Peter,
I don't know,
be the first pope or head of the church.
Brian is on Facebook like all day, so.
And everybody in the background is talking. We can hear everything you're saying. So if you don't want to be heard, just mute yourself out for us all.
The party line.
Yeah, that's right. It's a party line.
I think it's a party line. Yes.
But one of the things I look at when I look at that scripture, as I say, when I look at that scripture, one of the things it's like everybody misses. It's like, stop and realize where Yeshua and Peter were at when Yeshua made that statement. They were there at Mount Hermon. And so he was claiming, what was he claiming? That upon Peter he was going to build his church? No, he was claiming that, upon the very land or the very rock, the very ground that the angels supposedly landed on, that guess what? Whatever claim they thought they had to it, he had a superior claim. And upon this land, he was going to build his church.
Well, I have a different view about that, because I know that we are the third temple, and that, he is indwelling us, that's not made with hands. And the other fact of the matter is that he says that where 2 or more are gathered in my name, there I am in your midst. And then also, when I had gone to the school of the prophet, they were teaching about the ancient Hebrew pictograph, and they were talking about Peter, who do men say that I am? and he says something like, "Oh, some say that you're John the Baptist, some say that you're a prophet or teacher, but who do you say that I am?" And he says, "Well, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God." And he says, "Well, flesh and blood did not reveal that to you, but my Father in heaven revealed that to you. And upon this rock of revelation, I will build my church." That God can speak to you. God can speak to me. He can speak to us. That is the rock of revelation versus the physical, literal that other people try to, what do they call, bogart, to steal, to the carnal people. They use the physical, literal, but spiritual, they understand the deeper meaning of the metaphors and such. So I kind of look at it upon this rock of revelation, I will build my church, that God can speak to you. And we are the church. It's not a building made with hands, and it's not going to be on a place. Because he even said to that woman who was at the well when she was married, or she was with 5 different people, and the guy that she was with, she wasn't even married. She says, "How come my ancestors say we're going to worship here at Mount Moriah, but your ancestors say we're going to worship, in Jerusalem?" And he says, "There will come a time, that neither will we worship here in Mount Moriah, nor will we worship in Jerusalem, but we will worship in spirit and in truth." So that's kind of how my viewpoint, I look at it that way. It's a spiritual thing, a spiritual heaven, spiritual, a lot of things. Those other people, they can go ahead and take that UN building over in Mount Harmon and all that and make contact with those demons or whatever they're under there. Who knows? CERN, that's another thing. That CERN, Switzerland, they got that 17-mile circle thing. And I kind of went over that on one of my YouTube channel about CERN and Shiva, the destroyer. I went over on that, about that. And it's kind of interesting. There's a little parallel with the Hebrew understanding as well. So every culture, they have signs and symbols.
Hey,
Because
Aya,
signs and symbols, they
Aya,
kind of work.
Aya,
Yeah, yeah.
you've got a lot
Yes.
of static, and it keeps getting like worse and worse to the point where you can't even hear what you're saying now.
Oh, okay. I'll let you talk. Go ahead.
Yeah, you can't make out anything you're saying. But yeah, it's interesting, the certain situation as well. Is that they built that there actually on the border of France and the Swedish land. So, and I think it's kind of supposed to be some sort of like a neutral territory or something like that. It's part of the reason for that. But I think a lot of people are giving CERN way too much credit for different things occurring. Because it seems like every little thing that happens, somebody stubs their toe and it's CERN that caused it, But
It wasn't because my phone was filled with YouTube videos or TikTok or nothing like that. It wasn't working. It was CERN.
yeah, there you go. Yeah, it was CERN just happened to disrupt our call as 6 people on it. Exactly. Yeah. It was interesting. Brett was on here earlier and dropped off, which I kind of wish he had stuck around. It would have been interesting to hear what he had to say about some of his ideas on things. Because one of the things that I find frustrating, Haya and I were mentioning before we started recording about a video that's out right now, somebody talking about like a W4 process. And like I told her, within like 2-3 minutes listening to it, I kind of knew where the information was sourced from. And so I quit listening to it. And it seems like just about anybody now, it doesn't really take long. And I know pretty much the direction they're coming from and where they found the info at. Because myself, when I first started really looking at things, of course, I was hearing a lot of different voices of different people and different things people were writing and claiming and stuff. And some of it some of it, the majority of it just didn't feel right, didn't quite make sense. And so I said, you know what, I'm putting all this guru stuff to the side. I'm not paying attention to it. I'm going to get in and start digging in and learning what's really going on, and not be scattered among all the freaking tons of different rabbit holes you can go down, but pick out some individual ones and figure them out one at a time, you know. And, you know, for instance, like looking at how things are structured with everybody really being in a position of a representative capacity. You know, you look at everybody in court, everybody there is in a representative capacity, you know, for the state or the county, for whatever the case may be. And so what would make you think you're not seen in the same way? And then figuring that out as to how you're observed. Because you hear a lot of people will say, oh, they see you as dead and that's why they can't hear you. And yeah, it's like, okay, enough of that nonsense. There's got to be a little bit more to this, which there obviously was. And once you start learning these things, a lot of these little pieces start falling into place and making a whole lot of sense. But, and then you go back, and then
Well, I'm
after
a little happy. I'm a little happy right now. I'm a little
a lo-
happy that my phone is still on because I did. Can you hear me okay?
yeah, you
I
sound good.
did send in the remittance coupon. I endorsed it for the cell phone service, and this was due on July 7th, and I don't have my stuff cut off yet. Usually by now they're sending me texts saying I need to send stuff, but I just wrote the amount in there, endorsed it, put that number in the back, the special exemption number, and sent it back to them. And my phone is still on, and I'm getting notifications and all that, so I'm kind of happy about that right now. I'm
Yeah,
hoping it's going to
awesome.
go through. I don't know
Awesome.
if you
Yeah,
have to do it every month.
and I know there's a lot of those different things like that that can work, and I've used as well, and that do work. But then you also see some stuff, and for me, like when I was first researching, I was going and, you know, seeing if I could find any way of accessing like the old message boards and stuff like that, whether it was Yahoo or whoever. And I was kind of looking at what different people were doing to see what was succeeding and what wasn't succeeding. You know what I mean? And so much of what I see today is just the same old stuff that I saw people trying to use 20 or 30 years ago that wasn't doing anything. But people find that info today and they think it's like brand new knowledge or something like that. And, you know, they don't really realize this is just,
Are you saying that you're trying to tap into your old accounts like MySpace or something? What were you saying? You're trying
no,
to tap into the old Google accounts or something? Yahoo?
yeah,
What?
the old like message boards and stuff people used to communicate with. Because when I first started, I mean, at that time on Google
Yeah.
or whatever search engine, you could actually find different things like that.
Yeah, I know. That's how I met a lot of people. I mean, people that I'm friends with now, still on Facebook. But you know, it's kind of cool that I was just looking on my phone, in the pictures area, photos, and I realized that I can plug in, you know, old years like 2017 or something. And I found a ton of my videos. I was so excited that I posted a ton of stuff on TikTok that in my research that I did at the university. And I thought that all that stuff was lost. But all this time, obviously, because, you know, you pay for your, what is it called? Cloud. You pay for your cloud. So it's apparently from all those other phones that I had that I recorded, it's up in the cloud. And I just didn't know how to access that. So I was so
Okay.
excited. I must have posted about 5 videos today, this morning.
Well, that's a nice thing too about even like Google, as much as people don't like Google, is that you can go under, you know, your old Google account and stuff and find things that you did, you know, a few years ago. That, yeah, like you say, a lot of people think they switch computers or phones, they think it's lost, but no, it's still floating around out there in cyberspace, you know. What I find interesting recently is, for instance, Gmail wanting me to go and buy extra space, saying that, you know, I'm almost full, da da da. And I thought, wow, that's kind of interesting from Gmail because I know my Yahoo account, I probably have 300,000 unread emails there, you know, and nothing's getting filled up at Yahoo.
You could have won the Publishers Clearinghouse thing, and you just didn't know it. You haven't read that email yet?
Yeah, all right. I could have Ed McMahon knocking on my door, which of course,
With a big check.
which of course they claim now never happened. They're saying Ed McMahon never went around handing out checks. And one of the other
But
Mandela
we've seen
effects.
pictures of it.
Yep, but it's easy to find. Well, and you mentioned one yourself earlier, Haya. You mentioned the scripture where two or more are gathered in my name. You can look that scripture up. That scripture doesn't say that anymore.
Oh, is this the Mandela effect or what? What's the deal?
Right.
What does it say?
Yep. Yeah, it says where two or three are gathered in my name. It doesn't say two or more anymore.
Oh. Well, or more. 3 or more. No. That's okay. There's 2 of us here right now, so this is working.
Who knows, a couple more years, it might say something altogether different again. They might just keep changing things.
I mean, they might put the Berenstein Bears in there or something.
Yeah, they might change that back again. You know. But I know I've got our co-host Keith is with us here, and we got Captain John with us here. You know, anybody who wants to pipe in, feel free to do so. This is kind of an open mic night for everybody from the group, and anybody who just kind of stumbles in, whether you're in the group or not, doesn't matter.
Greetings, everybody.
Hey, how we doing, Keith?
Good.
Greetings.
Just got done with about an 8-hour class on the new Postal Service Reform Act of 2022. Showing everybody how it's all, like I said, an insurance perpetrated through the Postal Service. And that new Postal Service Reform Act pretty much points it out. The whole thing talks pretty much nothing but insurance. And there's a very, very small section where it talks about mail delivery. Otherwise, the rest of it is entirely insurance in regards to Postal Service workers and Postal Service annuitants and their family members. And that's the insurance. And it explicitly starts out with the Medicare A and Medicare Part B.
You know, that's interesting. One of the things that I always kind of thought was the way things should be, they were doing within the USPS, and that is that with the way they've got things structured, people that are working for them, if they potentially work X amount of time and retire, they're supposed to have everybody's benefit package for their retirement totally paid off before they even retire. It's not one of these Ponzi schemes, you know, kind of like Social Security is, where after somebody retires, the people that are currently working today are paying towards those benefits that are being received by somebody, or, you know, the obligations rather that they're receiving from the company or from Social Security. Yeah, with Postal Service, everything is supposed to be already prepaid up ahead of time for those people. So I find it kind of interesting when they start crying, you know, that they're broke, they need to raise the prices on stuff, you know.
Yeah.
I think they're just doing a poor management job. You know, treat it like the business that it is and start competing against FedEx.
Well, yeah, and I think that's because the Postal Service workers themselves don't have the knowledge of how that system runs. See, they're supposed to, in that annuitant program, they're paying into, like you said, an investment program that's supposed to be paid off before they retire, so that it's all set up so they can transfer the entire thing to their private landed estate. Well, the thing is that through the statistical data elements, the Bureau of Vital Statistics, everybody's entered into that record, but not everybody's actually eligible. And what happens is those that are actually eligible and actually employed through the Postal Service, that program operates correctly for them because they are giving their investment in there. That's their time. That's what's being considered their investment. And then their retirement bond is a bond within the Postal Service. They are a one-stop shopping bank for taxes, bonds, and insurances. And what happens is the people that are signing up that SS5 become a Medicare qualified government employee, but it's a demonstration project throughout their entire life because they never actually qualify because they're not part of the government. They don't want to be part of the government. They want to be the beneficiary. But the problem is that they took upon an instrumentality that places an automatic presumption that they are one of the trustees, just not qualified yet for payment. And therefore, they're volunteer trustees in a principal place of business, operating as a banking institution, authorizing all the banking forms for everything they do, education, hospital, everything. And the problem is that if they don't understand that, they're being taken advantage of by filling a position that isn't really even needed. And it places a volunteerism on there for somebody that could become eligible through certain qualifications, but doesn't know this, and so he never does. And that's entering all that information into a record that doesn't belong. If you're not part of the Postal Service, you're not qualified to be putting information into that public record as a liability. You have to have a specific appointment and not just some mere assignment of a Social Security number as a newborn child. That places an impossibility on the record by that.
Well, they even do the same thing with the citizens regarding Social Security as well. If somebody's receiving your obligations from Social Security after retirement, you look at the number that's used, it's the Social Security number followed by a letter. And if you go and look up in United States Code where it discusses the Social Security number, it tells you that the number is supposed to be just the number, period, no letters. But if there is a letter attached, that means that you are an auxiliary beneficiary,
Right.
which is kind of fascinating there because now you're not just the sole beneficiary. You're an auxiliary beneficiary. There's somebody else with a higher status that's actually attached.
Right. Or an equal status, and that's that interest, which is of the United States, and the principal, which is that auxiliary beneficiary. See, as the record beneficiary, that name and number identify the record. As an auxiliary beneficiary, it's identifying the actual benefactor who has the equal station as the United States in regards to the interest versus the principal, because that's where the principal derives from. Is the benefactor. The true creation of that documentation was dependent upon his coming into existence. Otherwise, the United States wouldn't have an interest in it in regards to commercial transactions receiving federal taxes. So we do the chain of title right back up the line, and it should end up with the Postal Service. Because again, that the United States is an agency of the Postal Service. The federal government means all entities of the government of the United States, including the United States Postal Service registered agent and the Postal Regulatory Commission. Now, one is commercial and the other is military. I think you could figure that out. Commissary, FIDE commissary. That is the fidelity commissary for being associated with fellow infantrymen. Commissary, FIDE, and confidential. They all play together, and that's privity of contract. And I don't have that FIDE commissary. I have access to it, but again, it can only be properly accessed as the beneficiary by the proper auxiliary beneficiary, proving that I'm not part of the Postal Service or the military service. But because I don't have a military myself, I am dependent upon the protections of that service under domestic tranquility and general welfare. That's
I'm just curious. I'm just curious. Is somebody doing dishes or something in the background?
I am. I'm cooking. Look, I'm cooking.
Oh, all
Too bad for
right.
you.
So yeah, it's a matter of knowing what's actually going on, and like I professed many times, the true benefit in regards to a spiritual war is knowledge. If we don't have the knowledge of the various different grammar styles and how they play the game and stuff, we can't defeat them. And it tells us this in Isaiah 54 to rise up against any tongue that would prosper against you. This means we have to know the tongues to be able to rise up against them.
Yep. You gotta know what's being used. All right. I guess. What is that? Ignorance of the law is no excuse. I guess is something I can always fall back on. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, my favorite thing is that if it says in Jeremiah 1:5 that we're known before we were formed in the belly, and before we were cast from the womb, he sanctified us and ordained us a prophet unto the nations. That part right there tells me I should go to the very top where nations have their laws, and that's that law of nations we always speak about, otherwise known as the principles of the laws of nature. And by nature, I am a peaceful man, and I don't need the laws of war, in military, and all that under the construct of the law of nations, because I'm a peaceful man. I am my own plenipotentiary. I have an issue with other people that, like I said, the post office will be the first people that call the local police if they have a problem with somebody, instead of realizing their own power and their own authority and the responsibility that brings in having that knowledge. This proves that those people are incompetent. They're supposed to have this knowledge. They're the ultimate authority in the contracts around the world. And it is a military authority. It's a Marine installation. All postal offices are inland Marine installations. And if the government, like I explained earlier, the national currency, we don't have a national currency. Do you have access to United States notes? No. What we have is a reserve currency. And therefore, if we don't have a national currency, we don't have a national government, we have a reserve government. That reserve government is postal service under an international trust.
You know who the second highest paid official is in the U.S. company? Of course, we know that the top highest paid official would be the president, right?
I would otherwise think the office of inspector, post office inspector general.
Yeah, inspector general. Yeah, it's the federal U.S. postmaster. It's the second highest paid.
Yep, and I believe he's the one that's assigned as the inspector general of the postal service, which serves as the same position as the inspector general of the Postal Regulatory Commission, if the actual inspector general of the Postal Regulatory Commission is busy otherwise. It's an automatic delegation to that other postal service, the postmaster.
Yeah. And the whole thing is also convoluted, regarding the hierarchy and who's in charge of what and who does what and who's liable for what and who's not and everything like that. And like I was saying earlier on when we started this evening, one of the things I went and looked at were, some of the more recent patriots from maybe the 70s onward and things that have been happening with them. And to look to see, where there was successes and where there was failures, and pretty much all you really find is failure. You don't find too many successes. And all of them, what they were all really trying to do was come from the standpoint of feeling that they could hold, the company responsible for what they were doing, and try and enforce them to go by what the Patriots thought was right. And none of that really panned out too well for any of them, and it's really because it's a closed shop. That's
Well, and not only that, but you have the Patriots acting as if though they're a closed shop too, when we both recognize that the main factor in all of it is that amnesty, that peace agreement, that realization and recognition that we're actually allies. We're not actually in a war. I struggled with that for a couple years after my last trial. I was still at war. And thank God I'm coming out of it gradually and slowly. And, I still show some passion and aggression and anger in there, but I've quelled it so much and realized that at the same time that I can't force them to do anything. They never really forced me to do anything. It was an indoctrination system that I just started doing things because people kept telling me that's what they're supposed to do.
exactly.
Now I know different.
Yeah, you've got, and there's so many little things that hit the subconscious that lead you in that direction without even people realizing it. But you listen to even just the radio, any radio station, you're going to get little blurbs of news or whatever that come over it, and you're going to hear little comments like your congressman or your representatives or your president, or this is what they're doing with your tax dollars and things like that. Just little things that kind of try and pull you in and make you feel like you are a member or a part of whatever they are doing.
Yep.
And myself, in looking at all these people, the only people I really found having any degrees of success were people that said, you know what, I'm just going to write a Dear John letter to the company and say, hey, you guys continue on with what you're doing. I know you're going to, no stopping you. Just count me out. I'm not going to be involved in your battle. I won't war against you. You don't war against me.
Exactly. And that's exactly what it is realizing that there really is no war. And if it is all contract, it comes with privity and equal consideration and benefit. And if there comes to a detriment, it operates just like a trust. As long as somebody recognizes it, they can cancel the contract, walk away. That's the recourse.
Yeah. Well, every little single thing they've done has been in trust format. I mean, right down to the roads you drive on. The roads you drive on are all held in different little trusts. And even the driver's license contract, that's a trust format as well. And
it's relative, like I said, through the Postal Service. Every last one of those identifications and licenses and insurances, every last one of them is going to ask you for the address and your name to attach to that address. And that address is a street name known as a security, and it's got its very own bond number for the location.
Yeah. So the best thing you can do is use as little of their tools as possible.
Yep. I've got one banking instrument on me, and it's not considered an actual identification because if I were to present that bank card, they'd still want a picture ID. Well, I'm sorry, I don't have any. Imagine that. Can you prove that this isn't me without a picture? Because I guarantee you the Bancorp of America, PayPal, and MasterCard under the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation and the Federal Communication Commission that keeps track of all the electronic transfers on this card will verify, yeah, he's who he says he is. We've all verified it. We've all been doing business with him for a long time. He's a good customer.
Well, and that goes back though as well. I mean, even if it is, say, a state ID or a driver's license, it kind of goes back to the maximum of law. Similar is not the same. Is that you on the card? No, it's not. The only me that exists is me right here in the flesh. That might be a likeness, but no, that's not me.
Yeah. And that's a very clear distinction that would make it so easy for everybody, but everybody insists on making it complicated. Oh, it's got to be more than that. Nope. Look in the mirror. That ain't you. That's an image.
Well, if you go to a definition for identification as well, and it's going to tell you that it's really two things appearing as one, or two things appearing as the same. And so what are you doing there when you do that? Now you're kind of getting into necromancy a little bit. You're getting into a little bit of witchcraft, a little bit of, voodoo, whatever you want to call it, because you're taking something that is an inanimate object and you're personifying it, and you're
Adding
giving it the
character.
spirit of life.
Yep, adding character. Yep.
And that's just part of their whole game. That's all part of what we've said many times. All they're doing is just purely mirroring the system that the creator set up. And because, of course, that Satan can't be God, but he can appear to be as God or like him. All he can do is provide a mirror image. And that's exactly what today's system has done. Whether it is the state or the Fed or court, whatever you want to do. It's just a mirror of everything. I mean, you've got, the temple that used to exist with the people. Well, you've got the temple sitting there as the county seat, with your black robe priest sitting up on the throne. Every county. It's probably the number one business, I would say, in the U.S. is the courthouse.
Oh, most
People
certainly.
go in.
Social Security is the largest. What they say? Insurance claims adjuster in the world.
Yep. Yep. Because they're going to be adjusting a claim at least once on everybody.
Oh yeah, at least.
Yep. That's a business that's going to reach out and touch every single individual. And one of the things I think is interesting, though, and so many people, like mentioning the Patriot community, complain about it being a corporation. It's not a legit government. It's de facto. Okay, whatever. I think that's actually one of your solutions, is because these things really aren't what they appear to be. And what they've done is they've farmed out all the governmental services to all these other little different agencies, whether it's a DMV or Social Security, and you've got the Treasury. It's a separate entity altogether as well. I mean, even Ron Paul, was wanting to, audit the Fed, and they came back and said, yeah, we don't have to respond because we're not a governmental agency. And that's what they've done. There's very few governmental agencies, and that's why, when they were talking about Joe Biden winning and saying, oh my gosh, he's going to have a federal or a national mask mandate. I was like, good. I hope he wins. And a lot of people look at me like I'm a deucer or something. And I said, no, seriously, I hope he wins, and I hope he does put out a mask mandate, because that's going to show you where the arm of the federal government can reach. And sure enough, that's what he did. Like the 21st of January, he went and put out the mask mandate. And what was it for? Clause number 2. It was for all federal employees and federal territories and possessions, that type of thing. And then in paragraph 3, it was essentially a recommendation or a challenge to everybody else, which showed you right there that the federal arm doesn't reach into everybody's household individually. It's not this great power that everyone assumes it to be. Yeah, you even look at like cities that said they were going to be sanctuary cities, things of that nature. And what did the federal government do? Well, the only thing they could do is they said, well, we're just not going to send you any more funding, which I think is perfectly fine. I believe there's plenty of these states that really can take care of themselves. The people are self-sufficient enough that they don't need money from the federal government. And they would find they'd have a whole lot more freedom when they quit receiving federal funds and started operating more independently. To me, that just makes sense. The more more centralized power you put into any entity, the worse things are going to be for you. Like I said, if earlier I said, if you're expecting man or some other entity to take care of all your problems and your needs for you, then you're really going to be giving up a lot of your own personal power, your own personal strength. Those things are all going to disappear. All right, what are we looking at? About 45 minutes we've been here. Anybody else have anything they want to jump on with? Feel free to do so. That's what these calls were intended to be for. Keith mentioned earlier, you mentioned the Law of Nations. And I had said, I'd kind of put away in the beginning, listening to a lot of the different people talk about solutions and ideas. But you quickly learn when you examine these individuals that this isn't something they've really done. You even pick up a legal dictionary and read the definitions of some of these terms and phrases that they're using when they're saying, to do it this way or do it that way. And you look those things up and you're like, wait a minute, this doesn't apply at all to what this person is talking about. It makes absolutely zero sense. Keith had mentioned the Law of Nations, and I say as far as comprehending how things work on the international scope politically, read the Law of Nations. And granted, it's a big book, and you could just read the preliminaries for the Law of Nations. It's only, I think, about 12 pages long. Read the preliminaries at least. And that will really wrap your mind around how all these different things operate between the different states, and then between the state and the nation, and between the nation and other nations. You get a better idea of that. And this is even mentioned in the U.S. Constitution. Well, that means just by mere mention that, that's part of the basis behind the United States is the Law of Nations. And so they're following those principles. So go and read those principles. Learn how these things operate.
Yeah, and remember, they're known as principles because they're, when you look at their construct, everything is a matter of adoption. Even when you look in the United States Code and the congressional record, it's we hereby adopt. And that's for an enactment, and that's all it is. When you go to the Constitution of Universal Postal Union, that's just another public offering that anybody can adopt. Line item veto certain elements by making the line through the terms and conditions that you don't agree with, and overriding more amendable terms that should be agreeable, and still allow that adoption to remain in honor for full ratification by the other party to become party to or within that commercial element of that offering. Otherwise, you can still adopt it and use it as a reference for the same equal standings of plenipotentiary powers. And you don't need a nation to have a president. You can do that all yourself. It's called self-determination. And if you really want to prove that you can self-govern, then you have to do that. No one else will do it for you. By having someone else do it for you, it proves you're not self-governing.
Well, when people hear some of these words and these terms, I recommend, go and pull out, even if it's not a legal dictionary, pull out Merriam-Webster and look it up, and look up what adoption is, because you see that word adoption very, very often. And an adoption is making use of something that created by someone else. It's not your own organic, original idea. It came from somewhere else. It originated somewhere else. Right. And you find it started right out even with the 1787 Constitution that was adopted by Congress in 1789. Correct. Adams and Jefferson, I mean, they didn't sit there in several days and just sketch out that document from nothing. The basis of it started somewhere, which I would highly recommend. Look at France. Benjamin Franklin spent more time in France and England than he ever spent in the United States.
Yep. And this is why I say, if you really are self-governing, then you've got to take it upon yourself to educate yourself, because taking upon the benefit of having somebody else educate you is in fact against your um
It's not natural.
against your own benefit. Because what you're in fact doing is, if you want to be open-minded, then you have to get away from those that are closed-minded and going to show you their way of doing things. You have to be observant from the outside and see the diverse ways of doing things and find one that works best for you. And then maybe even find a path where you can grow into another one that you think might work better and try it. And this is a multiplication of our talents, learning more than just one thing. And that's what Perpetuity is all about.
That idea gets very basic. Just when you look at just about everybody's life, is majority of people send their kids to what? Public schools. Well, who is funding those? Where is this education coming from? It's coming from the state. So do you think the state is going to give you knowledge that is actually going to benefit you, or that it's ultimately going to benefit them? They're going to train you to think and live and operate in a way that they best benefit from. It's just common sense. So yeah, you're subject to whoever it is that is supposedly educating you or whatever. Like David Williams says, those that don't know are at the mercy of liars. It's that simple.
And then it always goes down to the point where we see in the old kung fu movies, the master never teaches his student everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I know when I worked in restaurants as a chef for quite a while, that it's kind of a well-known fact among chefs that they never give out their recipe for something. They're always going to leave one or two little slight ingredients out of that recipe. They're the only ones that really know it.
Yeah, that's like family recipes. Grandma handed it down to mom handed it down to daughter, and none of them had to write it down because it was handed down by memory, by experience of doing it together.
Yeah, Keith, you're coming across really fuzzy on my end here.
My apologies.
No problem. But, well, I guess we've been sitting here going on for about an hour, but these are just some basic things that people need to think about when they're researching and looking at things. Look at where the info is coming from. Get as close to original source as you can, rather than taking somebody else's word for it. And also look and see what success these people are actually having, or what's really done for them. Have they even never really used it? Because you're going to find out the vast majority of the time, they never do the things they talk about. I was mentioning this to somebody the other day. We're talking about this topic. And I said, when these people are showing these different processes and things like that, there's some keywords to listen for. Listen for words like may or should or might, because you'll hear those little words stuck in there. If somebody says, well, this is what should happen. Oh, wait a minute. What do you mean this is what should happen? Did you do this? If you did it and it actually happened, then you can say this is what will happen. Or if they use the word may happen or maybe or might. Yeah, listen for those little key words, because that's telling you really how strong the info is that you're coming across.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I pay attention to. Like I said, I get deeply into the words and what they actually mean, and how a lot of them aren't really words; they're terms, and they're considered as words before our eyes because that's what we were told. But in fact, the term defend or defendant is not a word; it's a term. It's a word that has conditions placed upon it, and that changes what it means, and that's a term. The root word is fend. So by adding a prefix and a suffix and making it a defendant, it changes it all up. And now it's no longer a verb, it's a noun, and an abstract noun at that, meaning it's total fiction. It's been so morphed that it is not the real thing.
And it cannot fend for itself.
Correct.
You know? And that's one of the things I know early on, a lot of people will hear, I know I heard it, is, oh, they've changed the definitions of the words. It's like, well, that does happen over time in any society. Different words have a society kind of changes the meaning of things. But legally, this is really done by the attorneys, and the attorney's favorite thing to do is to reclassify things. And so what they did with some of these words is they just reclassified them, as Keith said. Instead of them just being a word, now they were a term. And a term is a tool of the legal society. And now that they've made it one of their tools, now they can define that tool to do and mean whatever they want, because they've reclassified it from a word into a term. And it's like I tell people, you're always signing something when you're making contracts saying that, you agree to the terms of this contract. Well, the terms of the contract don't just mean, well, if this happens, then that's going to happen. That's not the kind of terms they're talking about. The terms are those words that are used within that contract. Do you understand those words? Do you understand those terms? If you don't comprehend those terms, then you absolutely shouldn't be signing it. And as with anything, I've often said that, if we're going to teach our children something, one of the best things we could teach them is to realize that in life, whenever a signature is required for something, that means there's a contract operating in the background. Demand to see the contract. Don't sign anything without seeing the contract. Because if there's no contract, then there's absolutely no reason for a signature to be needed. And that goes with any instrument. You name it, and I can tell you where the contract is at for it. That's one of those other many rabbit holes you end up going down. Contract law.
And it's like I explained earlier in the Zoom I was doing on that Postal Reform Act. You got to think back. How many documents, how many things did we sign?
Yep.
Throughout our life, we were taught to sign. That was the purpose of English, was to teach us to sign. So we could start signing and sign as many documents as they wanted us to. And if that meant at least one a day, we were probably signing at least a document a day, some way, somehow.
Yeah, well, it's one of the things that you practice over and over when you're in grade school. You're practicing your signature.
Yeah. I quit. I retired. I no longer sign.
Yeah, there you go. Well, and what you said there, Keith, touches on one of the things that I hear quite often is people say, oh, I didn't have full disclosure and I shouldn't have to do anything. I shouldn't have to make up any kind of document, da, da, da. It's like, what do you mean you shouldn't have to? You've been doing it already your whole life. You've already been roping yourself in your whole life with all of these agreements you've been signing yourself onto.
And it's
funny.
It's so funny that they don't realize they're hanging themselves with their own rope, and that all they got to do, like I did, just quit signing.
And all those agreements are still going to exist. You know, you're going to have to do something. You go out there and rescind a few things.
Yeah, and they're already paid and operating.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that was when I was a zombie. I'm no longer a zombie anymore.
There you go. Well, we're talking about trust.
Reanimated.
We were talking about trust earlier, and how many of these things are all operating through a trust or involved in a trust. And one of the reasons why is because, everybody cries about full disclosure. Well, in a trust format, full disclosure is not always required. There are things that are allowed to stay privy to the trust itself and not be disclosed. So that's why they love using trust. But originally, when it comes down to it, contract law will supersede it anytime. Yeah, I know one of the things I spent a lot of time listening to debates on was different people arguing about trust law and contract law and what's superior to which and everything like that. Well, trust wouldn't exist without contract law. Now, contract law could exist without trust, but without contract law, no trust would ever survive because they rely on contract law. Because the contract makes the law. So your own personal contracts can supersede it. It can have more weight.
Well, this is what I explained about a simple trust is something that operates in the now time and does not last. And people are confused about this because if we know in trust law that the trust shall not fail for want of trustee, that means that a grantor can grant a gift directly to the beneficiary. He does not have to contract. So therefore, by a simple agreement of his own, in believing that his grandson is capable and willing to take his old farm truck and use it wisely, as soon as he gives it to his grandson, the trust is collapsed and it doesn't get established until he gives that. So it's an instantaneous thing. That's a trust in reality. Otherwise, if you have to extend the time span to any longer, then you're talking contract because now you've got future obligations that go along with that trust.
It's almost like these trusts are supplying everlasting life. All right, guys.
Don't they put it in a lot of their corporate possession laws in perpetuity?
Right. In perpetuity. Hey, that's one of my favorite things also. Every now and then you see people sharing stuff saying, oh, the Federal Reserve has collapsed or the Treasury's collapsed. Their charter hasn't been renewed. Well, shortly after they were established in 1913, it was like within 10 years, they were granted a charter in perpetuity by Congress. That was the McFadden Act, which means, guess what? They're never going away. They're only going to go away by an act of Congress because Congress put them in there in perpetuity.
Well, yeah, it's a sustainability of a commercial program that has to be there.
Yeah.
That's the only way a government can operate. So even without a government, you still have to have a commercial system.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the handful of legs that's required for a legitimate government to exist. It needs that. It needs the postal routes, like you were discussing there, Keith. Needs that. Needs the banks. Needs land. Needs a population. But fortunately, the population themselves don't need all those other things. They can operate just fine. Yeah, right. Yeah. The population of the sheep. All right, Keith, thanks for being here. Shaya, thanks for being here, dear.
Yes, God bless everybody. Appreciate y'all.
We'll see you all next Sunday night, 9 p.m. Eastern Time. Until then, everybody have a wonderful week, and we'll wait and see if anything new develops this week. Let's see what statues come down next. What kind of empires fall next? Because that's just part of heading towards the cliff. There's might be a lot of different diversions, but there is one ultimate goal that everything is going to be heading towards. There's no way of changing that. So until then, learn who you are, where you're really at, where you're really from. Because those are the things we've been deceived on, and learning those will put you leaps and bounds ahead of everybody else. Good night, guys.
Later.